Hi there, my name is Mohamed Hamid, and I'm a lead infrastructure engineer working in the cabinet as part of the Chief Digital Information Office. I work in a relatively small team and often have different hats in different areas, but predominantly I look after the network connectivity type elements, so things like the Wi Fi, the wireless security, the VPN infrastructure behind the scenes. And incidentally, I did speak in 2016 and where I spoke about securing the wireless LAN and some of the techniques that we had used at Cabinet Office back then. So today is slightly different. I'll be speaking about, or the title is Using a SIEM Platform for More Than Security. As many of you will know, a SIEM stands for Security Information Event Management Tool, and this really can be used for a number of things. But today I wanted to highlight and showcase one particular use case where we used the SIEM platform, and it's especially relevant as we are all working from home, or we have been working from home. And in the next couple of months, businesses and organizations are looking to return to the office. And as part of that, they're looking for some statistics or usage of the building, which I'll get into further on. Now, a SIEM gives us great insight into a network infrastructure, what's actually happening in there. I mean, the ability to monitor, identify, and proactively react to threats is important. But what's equally important is not really reacting to threats, but actually identifying behaviors. And this is where a platform such as SIEM can be relevant and really good for infrastructure. So I'll give you some examples. So let's take a real use case example of a user who changes their two-factor authentication within a minute. And this is something that actually happened. Now, if you have the right data sets in place and you've got the right capabilities and you're looking out for the right things, you can actually create an alert for a user who changes their 2FA details within a minute. And that could be an indicator of compromise. And this is where we're looking at behaviors, not necessarily threats. And in the same idea, let's take another example of a user that logs into a platform, but from a new IP address or unknown IP address that they don't normally log into. Now, there again, this can be flagged by a SIEM product, and security operations center can probably flag it and say, "Hey, this is not right." And incidentally, this was one of the reasons, or one of the cases that was flagged in the recent SolarWinds attack, where someone logged in from a foreign IP address, and it was picked up. And here, as I said, is where a SIEM comes in. Are we aware of these events taking place? Yes, it's important to secure your infrastructure with the right design techniques, what I spoke about in 2016. But today, in today's world, it's really about looking at the behaviors. And this is why I stress on behaviors and not threats. So, SIEM, if we take a little delve into it, I said it's about having the right data sets in there from multiple sources. And that's what really gives the platform a powerful thing. There's no point just buying a SIEM or using a SIEM platform, but not really using or leveraging its capabilities. So, for example, if we look at the diagram, we can see you can ingest or put data sets from various different environments. Whereas if it's your devices, your firewall infrastructure, switching, wireless, your email document solutions, or whether it's your ID cards, all these come together in one platform. And at the end of the day, you can create outputs from that. You can manipulate this data to create what you want out of it, whether it's alerts, whether it's reports for senior management, all that can be achieved through something like a security information event management platform. And that's all dependent on your needs of what you want to achieve from it. But as I mentioned today, I wanted to talk about particular use case, which I think is relevant to today. And I'll get onto that. But one thing I wanted to mention is that modern attacks are getting more sophisticated. And again, this is why it's important to access or know the behaviors. AV products, IPS on firewalls, they're all great things and they're based on signatures. But sophisticated attacks can get around that, where AVs will not detect it, IPS engines will not detect it. And again, this is why I emphasize behaviors is the key thing. And this is known as tactics, techniques, or procedures, or TTPs. And this is where you would use your SIEM platform to really look out for what you want to achieve from what you're monitoring. However, as I mentioned, the use case, a SIEM platform can be used for more than just security. It can be used in other ways as well. And the particular use case that is of interest that came to us or came to my team was recently, and our team is planning to return to the office in the next couple of months. We've all been working from home for the last year, and it's been a change for us. But now people would like to return to the office. Businesses are thinking about opening the offices. And one of the key things estates teams are asking is, how do we track how many people are actually in the office or the usage of the office? Now, for some buildings, that might be a relatively straightforward thing. Systems might be in there. But for us at the time, it wasn't really straightforward. And one of the main reasons for that was the ID card system wasn't connected to the network, and the data being outputted from there wasn't adequate enough. So the question came to my team, and it was, can we use IT to perhaps help this question of how is our building being used? How many people do we have on each floor? So what I then done was looked at the data sets that we have. I first looked at the our Google Workspace that we use. I looked at the data from there, and the idea was, can we use public IP addresses to perhaps identify if we have X amount of people from our public IP address, then we know that X amount of people in the office. However, after delving into those logs and trying to create something from there, it wasn't really appropriate for our needs. And as mentioned, our ID card system, again, wasn't quite adequate, wasn't connected up, so it wasn't something that we can refer to. So I then looked at the widest network and what could we get from there. And I looked at the mobile device management solution and the information that comes from there. And together from our firewall data and what information that held. And there was a common data set to all three, which was the MAC address of the device. The device itself, the user holds, all have a hardware address known as a MAC address. And a user who connects to the building or comes into the building will connect to the Wi-Fi system. So we looked at the data sets. I looked at our SIEM platform, did the searches, and identified a MAC address. And from there, we can tell when a user connects to the Wi-Fi and when the user disconnects, i.e., if they're in the office or not in the office. But it doesn't really give us the username of the device. Who does this device belong to? And this is where the data set of our mobile device management solution comes into play. We have the common field of the MAC address. We can stitch that data set together with it. And then if we want to get a bit more information from the firewall data, we can then stitch together the host name, for example, from the firewall DHCP data. And the DHCP data also gives us a bit more information about, again, when the user connected to the network or received an IP address from the DHCP. So that was sort of the plan of action of how we were going to see how many people are in the office and then perhaps on which floor by knowing which APs they're connected to. So what does that look like? So delving into the platform and into our logs, you can see on the first upper line, I've got the DHCP logs. And then from there, I looked at the MAC address. My first search query was for any item that contained the DHCP acknowledgement. And from there, you can grab a MAC address. Then looked at the Wi-Fi logs, and I looked at both at the association and disassociation, and both of them include the MAC address of the device as well. You can see they're common here, they're the same one. And then finally, looking at the device management logs from the mobile device management solution, we can see the same MAC address for this particular device. In this example that I'm showing exists. So there's three data sets, and we're stitching them together by the MAC address. And this was how we were going to achieve some sort of understanding of how many people were in the office. So it was a bit of iteration, bit of working together, trying to get what we want to achieve. And at the end, the search query looked like something like this. Now, I don't want you to go through the entire search query. This is just to showcase you what it looked like at the end. But one of the interesting things that was also impacting us was how many people were on each floor. So you can see in the search query, we did a lookup query against a CSV file. That file included the names of each access point, because the name of the access point unfortunately wasn't in our login data. So to get around that, we created a CSV file, and then we did a lookup against that to see which floor the users were in. And once this search query came together, I created a report, and then from that report, this was the output. So you can see on a particular given day, the interface in this case is our wireless network, and the host name are the devices that belonged to our enterprise. And then you've got the last user, which I've covered out here, but you've got the user, and then you've got the on time and the off time. So in this case, the on time is the Wi-Fi logs of when they associated to the network, and the off time is when they left the network. One of the key things to pay attention here is that these are looking at devices, not users. So one of the downsides is there is a user that could come into the building, but then not connect to the Wi-Fi, not have a device, roam around the building, and then leave. And this is something that I flagged to the estates team. But going from a place of not knowing entirely the usage of a building at any given time, but to a point where we have a daily report of how many people are in the office, was a powerful thing for the estates team, because it allowed them to manage uh, who is in the building. So they had a register of who's going into the building, but again, they can ascertain that or verify that against data from our network infrastructure. And this is something that's becoming more important in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, as more and more people go back into the office. So I suspect that this will continue for the next probably couple of months, as I said. And before I finish off, I wanted to talk about another quick use case where our SIEM platform has really come into play. Our developers sometimes they use a product called ngrok. And ngrok is something where you can expose your laptop to the internet if you're looking to test something. So typically what we get is developers want to test their code, so they use ngrok to expose their laptop onto the internet, and then they will use their mobile device to test that code. And the reason why they use this is because on the wireless network, we deploy client isolations where devices cannot talk to each other. And that's a security mechanism that I spoke about in 2016. But what was interesting is we found that in a particular case a number of years ago, there was a URL, because ngrok generates a randomized URL. So in the screenshot, I've showed you some of the randomized URLs in a basic search on the SIEM platform. But one of the URLs that it generated was previously used by a malware or a command and control calling home malware. And that was flagged by our firewall device and something that we investigated and looked at. And as a result of doing that investigation and being able to quickly see how many people were using this product, we came up with a recommendation of actually perhaps investing in the product ngrok, so that the URLs that are generated are unique URLs rather than URLs that could be reused again maliciously by someone else. So that brings us to the end of the talk. I hope you gained some insight. To do a quick recap, we spoke about how you can use a SIEM product for more than just security. And having worked in the pandemic, offices are now coming back into the building. There are new requirements of how our building are being used. And the use case that I showcased is how we used various different data sets, stitched them together to get a good idea of how many people are in the office itself. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.